Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Also, I'm very happy to see that there is Turkish women representation in this group as well, IBK. So I would like to start off with female employment and domestic violence in this great session. So let me start off first saying the title and then move on with the motivation. So the title of my paper is Paperwork for Women and Domestic Violence, Evidence from the Rwandan Coffee Mills. So to start off with motivation, although this session does not need any motivation, is that domestic violence is a global health problem. Specifically on the global health problem margin, 1 in every 3 women worldwide have experienced either physical or sexual violence from their partners at some point in their lives, and this number is much higher in the developing countries. To give an example, in Rwanda, the context of the study, 49.5% of partnered women experienced domestic violence in the past 12 months as of 2010. To address this problem, address domestic violence, providing job opportunities to women is widely discussed in the global policy debate. And the argument is as follows. The employment of women can decrease domestic violence, either via the increase in women's outside options, mainly bargaining power, and or a decrease in financial stress in the household due to the increase in overall resources. Yet there is limited causal evidence on the literature, specifically on the effects of increased job availability for women. The literature focused on the effect of cash transfers, unemployment and then wage gap in education, as well as dowry payments, which are a bit different compared to increased job availability for women specifically. And there is mixed evidence from the cash transfers literature, which says that providing income to women can actually decrease domestic violence as well as increasing it due to husbands' increased incentives for extracting those newly acquired resources, as well as male backlash due to patriarchal norms. So this raises the question of whether providing jobs to women will either be beneficial for them, will protect them, or maybe it can also be harmful for them at the end of the day. So this brings me to my research question, which is, does providing job opportunities to women decrease the violence they face from their partners? To answer my research question, that I will be using a specific context, which is the government-induced rapid expansion of coffee mills. We can think of like coffee factories where women work in Rwanda in the 2000s as a natural experiment. In this context enables me to capture the effects of paid job availability for women, because in the context, women transition from being unpaid family workers in their family coffee plots, coffee farms, to wage workers in the coffee factories, coffee mills, for the same coffee processing tasks, same tasks as before. So with this context, I will be able to identify the effects of having a job, which is earnings as well as non-monetary benefits of a job, like the confidence that you receive when you work, and basically the effects of the co-workers and you and so on. And at the end of the day, the results will not be affected by like learning a new skill, given the fact that they're doing the same tasks as before. So basically the context enables me to capture the increased job availability for women. As a part of the introduction, before showing the summary of the results, I would like to go over what a coffee mill is, since I will be saying that pretty much throughout the presentation as well as the introduction. So coffee mill is where coffee cherries, the harvest of the coffee plant, a coffee tree, is processed into coffee beans so that it's exported to foreign countries, to basically Europe and US basically. So the key feature of the coffee mill that provides an identification is that a coffee mill serves coffee farmers who resides in this catchment area, a 4-kilometer buffer zone, this 4-kilometer radius circle around the mill. The reason why there's a catchment area of a mill, that the mill is a specific catchment area, is that coffee cherries will rot if not transported to a mill within few hours of harvest. So couple X in this context, basically in this visualization, is within the catchment area, but the couple Y is outside of the catchment area. And like, think of those couples like coffee farmers. By the time they bring those their coffee produce to the mill will not be accepting them. So like couple Y, like husband and the wife, will not be specific to the woman, will not be have the opportunity to work there. So basically, couple X will be the beneficiaries of the opportunities in the mill. So based on this key feature, I will be using a staggered difference and differences design for my identification strategy. I will first use the spatial variation that I just go over within and outside of the catchment area. I will be also using the time variation before and after a mill opening. And for this, I will be using self-reported domestic violence and labor market outcomes. And to complement these main results, I will be using a difference and differences event study design using the universe of monthly hospitalizations for domestic violence in the country, which is a unique administrative data set. I will continue to be using the same spatial variation within and outside of the catchment area, but this time, what I will be using differently is that I will be using a monthly time variation, exploiting the fact that the mills open only during the harvest months, between basically March and July during the year. So I will be using the beginning of the harvest season, March, as the main event, so that I will be able to see within a year, specifically during the time when women are working for pay during the harvest months, I will be able to see whether there is a decline in domestic violence or not when women are working for pay. The preview of the results, first results on self-reported domestic violence. Women in the catchment area are 18% more likely to work for cash and 26% less likely to self-report domestic violence in the past 12 months. So there's a decline in domestic violence. And there is no change in the overall labor supply behavior, but what is mainly changing is they're working for cash, is basically the working for pay margin. And for the hospitals in the catchment area are 20% less likely to have a domestic violence patient in a harvest month compared to 1 month before the harvest season. There is again a decline in domestic violence, and there is no change in women's non-domestic violence hospitalizations during the harvest months. The ones that is changing are specifically whether the women are being a domestic violence patient or not. I also document that there is an increase in earnings both for women and the husbands. I will get to why there is an increase in husbands as we go along, but basically I'm documenting an increase in the household resources, both via the men and the women. So this is the first part of the paper that I will be going over in the next, the remaining minutes. But in the second part of the paper, I will be uncovering the mechanisms behind the results. And I show that the decline in domestic violence is plausibly driven by women's paid employment. And there are two main channels based on this conclusion, which is the increase in women's outside options and the bargaining power, as well as women's contribution to household earnings. The increase in household earnings is the two mechanisms behind this conclusion. And I also go over in detail and show that the increase in husband's earnings is not the dominant mechanism behind the result. So this is not just a paper on there's an increase in husband's earnings and that's the reason there's a decline in domestic violence. It's basically the decline is driven by women's paid employment. So now I will jump into the context, empirical specification, and results and mechanisms in detail. So the context is in 2002, the government adopted the National Coffee Strategy, which aimed to shift the mill process coffee production to participate in the international specialty coffee market. International specialty coffee market is basically the coffee that we see in the Starbucks. For instance, in the US, it's like the, or like in other parts of the world, it's basically the coffee that we see in Starbucks and the big coffee chains. In the early 2000s, a public-private partnership project helped farmers to establish cooperatives and build mills in the communities. And after the project, farmers continued to build mills across the countries, and rapid expansion took place between 2005 and 2012. So this is a visualization of the expansion over the years, but on the x-axis you see the number of the years, and on the y-axis you see the total number of the mills. And as you can see here, is that there's a rapid expansion between 2005 and 2012. What is important for this expansion for women is that before a mill opening, farmers clean coffee cherries, dry them, and sort out the defectives all by hand and sell the product in the local market. And in this setup, drying and sorting are female-dominated tasks, and selling is a male-dominated task. And due to this context, the husband is the one who receives and controls all the income from the coffee, and woman does not have any personal income based on this setup. And after a mill opening, husbands sell the coffee cherries to the mill, and they continue to have a task. Are basically cleaned by the machinery in mills, and that's basically the technology in the mills. Thanks to the basically that machine is that those machines are not able to dry and sort the coffee cherries. Basically, a woman needs to do the drying and sorting. Basically, those tasks continue to be made, and those are, given the fact that they're female-dominated tasks, basically, mills are demanding paid labor from the catchment area, and again, due to the fact that it's a female-dominated task, basically, mills are demanding paid labor from the woman. So it's basically opening of a mill is an opportunity for the woman to transition from being an unpaid family worker to from their family farms to a paid worker, wage worker in the mill. To visualize basically the environment, since I will be saying mill pretty much in the remaining minutes, is that, so this is basically a mill environment. It's basically inside of a mill in Rwanda. And as you can see that like now women are sorting out the coffee, these are the defectives. So this is the main task, the female dominated task that she is doing. And as you can see, all of her co-workers are women, given the fact that it's a female dominated task. So this is what she is receiving a daily wage for. So what happened to the men? I also said that there is some change in the men. So for husband, there is no transition. He was already working for pay from selling the coffee, home processed coffee in the local market for a low price. And now he continues to work for pay, and now he's selling coffee cherries to the mill. So no transition for paid work, but what's happening is that he is having a higher income from selling cherries to the mill, since it's more profitable to sell the cherries to the mill compared to selling like a home processed coffee in the local market. So jumping into data, I use multiple highly detailed data sets to make my analysis. The first one is the data on mills, which is a geocoded universe of data on geocoded universe of mills, which have the information about the mill's year of operation, which enables me to do a staggered difference and differences design, since different portions of the country receive the mill in different years, basically. And I complement with a lot of highly detailed data set on variables related to coffee, so that I basically make sure that the opening of a mill is not endogenous, or I don't have any omissive variable bias. Moving on to domestic violence data set, first I will be using a demographic health surveys, which is a sub-reported data set. And this data set is geocoded as well, which enables me to match the couples, men and women, with the mill, so that I will be able to see whether what is like the differences between women in the catchment area and outside of the catchment area. I also have the information about like women's labor market outcomes. So basically this data set gives me all the sub-reported outcomes that I have. I also have the individual earnings of the couples with a household survey. Although this data set is not geocoded due to the geographic identifiers, I still have the opportunity to understand how meal exposure is affecting women's earnings and men's earnings differently. So the second data set, the data set that makes this paper unique is the fact that I'm using both self-reported as well as novel administrative records on the universe of monthly hospitalizations in the country. This is again a geocoded data set. Is the first thing off, giving the fact that so basically the geocoded nature enables me to match the hospitals now with the mills so that I will be able to measure meal exposure. This is a monthly data set, which enables me to basically detect the changes in domestic violence, specifically in the months when are working for pay. So this is basically creating a very precise measure. And it's like a panel data set that I will be able to see all of the hospitals over the years. One disadvantage of the data set I need to be transparent with is that this is only coming from at the end of the expansion period where the number of meals are fixed. So I will be able to have the data set for only a couple of years, not during the expansion period, but I'm still able to detect what's going on specifically during the harvest months when the women are working for pay. It's actually a universe of hospitalizations due to gender-based violence, but specifically I highlight, named outcomes for age older than 18 as domestic violence, given the fact that majority of the women older than 18 are already married in Rwanda. And as a placebo outcome, I already have the data for non-domestic violence hospitalizations. So jumping into empirical strategy, which I will be going briefly for the sake of time, is the dependent variable is a binary variable coded as 1 if woman I in sector S, which is a 50 kilometer square area, and in year T worked for cash and experienced domestic violence in the past 12 months. This is a classical staggered difference and differences setup. And the MIL ICT is the main treatment variable, which is a binary variable coded as 1 if woman I in sector S and year T resides within the catchment area of a MIL or otherwise. So whether you're in the MIL, in the catchment area of a MIL or outside of the catchment area of a MIL is the main treatment variable. And the beta 1, the effect of being in the catchment area of a MIL, is capturing the main parameter of interest. I have a very rich set of controls and fixed effects, as well as I'm also controlling for the linear time trends, which for the sake of time, I will not go into detail, but it's due to the richness of the data, I will be able to control in a very granular level. Before moving on to showing the results, I would like to visualize the catchment area within the outside of the catchment area with a couple of maps, and I show how I create a robustness check based on that. So I will always be showing two set of results for the self-reported outcomes, which is on the left. The first one that I will be showing is the treatment group will be the couples within the catchment area, which is basically the circle area. Like if we basically focus on, for instance, the triangle, the mill, these households are the treatment households. And basically the households outside of the catchment area within a district, this is basically not the whole country, but the district, 800 kilometers square area. Basically all of the households here are the control households. So this is the first setup, which is a within district approach results that I will be showing. I will also be showing that a different approach, which I call a donut approach, which is basically the treatment group continues to be the same, but now the control households will be just the households within the donut area around the treatment group, the circle catchment area. So basically with these two approaches, spoiler alert, they will always give the same result. I will be able to show that even in a different control group, it's a very small control group, results basically hold. So jumping into the results, on the left-hand side, you're seeing the within district approach, and on the right-hand side, it is the donut approach. In both cases, there is no change in overall labor supply behavior when are working before and after, but what is changing is that there is an increase in working for cash upon a mill opening for women in the catchment area. And there is a decline in domestic violence in the past 12 months. So increase in women's working for cash in the past 12 months, which is accompanied with decrease in domestic violence in the past 12 months. And this is self-reported outcomes. I also make an analysis for the husband's employment, and I show that there is no change in the working for husbands. It's as I go over earlier in the context, but like there is also no change in working for cash for the men. So it's basically there's no transition for the men, and both for working as well as like the working for cash. So this is basically a summary of like there's no transition for men. The transition was for women. I also checked basically the earnings for men and women, last daily earnings for both women and men, women and their husbands specifically. And I'm documented that due to meal exposure, there is an increase in individual last daily earnings, both for the woman and the husband as I go. So it's basically like a testament that what I go over in the context section is basically completely confirmed by the fact that there's an increase in both the women as well as the husbands. The second set of results that I would like to go over is based on the hospitalizations data set. Again, let's remember the fact that this data is coming meals are fixed. And now I will be showing what will happen to the hospitals in the catchment area relative to the ones that are outside of the relative to hospitals outside of the catchment area. So the dependent variable is now binary variable coded as 1 if hospital H in district D, month M, and year T has a domestic violence patient and 0 otherwise. Again, let's remember the fact that this is a monthly data set. So I'm specifically capturing within a year what will happen to the domestic violence, the probability of having a domestic violence patient. And MIL HT is a binary variable coded as 1 if hospital H in district D is located within the catchment area of a MIL and 0 otherwise. So I will be showing a figure which is basically a beta for every year, every month within a year from January to all the way up to December. And specifically, I will highlight whether the beta is specific during the harvest month, whether there is a decline or not. Again, I have a set of controls, and specifically since this is not like a repeated cross section, specifically it's like a panel data set, I will be able to use hospital fixed effects, which is a further strength of this data set as well. So jumping into visuals. So again, this is basically these points are all the betas within a year. And what we need to look specifically is during the peak of the harvest. So there is a beginning of the harvest period, there's a peak of the harvest period within a year, as well as there's like a post-harvest period. Specifically, the peak of the harvest period is like basically the months that women, the majority of the women in the catchment of a mill are working for pay. And I see that specifically in those, in that period is the time when we observe a decline in domestic violence. Having a domestic violence patient is basically decreases during the peak of the harvest when women are working for pay. There is no change in the post-harvest months, and I will get back to that in the mechanism section. But like as a highlight of this figure, there is a decline in domestic violence when women are working for pay. Of course, you can say that like maybe this is due to the fact that the opportunity cost of going to a hospital increased during the harvest months, since now if a woman does not go to a hospital, when a woman go to a hospital within the harvest months, now they're losing a wage for it. So it's very costly actually to go to a hospital within these periods, within these months. So as a placebo test, what I do is that I checked, I basically plot and estimate basically the probability of women going to a hospital, not for for domestic violence cases, but for like women's monthly hospitalizations for non-domestic violence diseases that is nothing related to domestic violence. And as you can see here, having a non-domestic violence the patient basically is not changing within a year, which suggests the fact that it's not like women are going to hospital less. If that's the case, we need to be seeing a decline in this graph as well. So it's only the domestic violence hospitalizations that we're seeing a decline in, which is again confirms the fact that there's really a decline in domestic violence irrespective of the increasing cost of going to a hospital. So up until now, how many minutes do I have?
We have about 2 minutes left.
Oh, 2 minutes left. Oh, I get super slow then. So basically, up until now, what I go over is the potential mechanisms behind the decline in domestic violence. So the results, whether there's a decline in domestic violence or not. But now I'm going over the potential mechanisms. The first thing that I will be showing is that I find that making decisions on large household purchases alone or jointly with the husband increased relative to the husband is making the decisions for them. Don't I have 4 minutes since we started a bit later on? Anyway, I'm continuing on. It will be nice if you have answered.
I'm sorry, maybe. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
We started now.
Yeah, we started at 20 past. So yeah, but please go ahead 3 minutes more and then we have time for questions.
Okay, thank you. What I show is that making decisions on large household purchases alone or jointly with the husband is it's more likely to make such decisions jointly or alone with the husband relative to the husbands are making the decisions for them, which suggests the fact that there is an increase in women's bargaining power and there's an increase in women's outside options. So this is the first mechanism that I provide evidence for. The majority of the domestic violence literature suggests the fact that there's an exposure reduction channel. Now women go out and work, which means that there's a decline in exposure between the couples. So maybe that's driving the results. In order to test whether this is the case or not, I focus on a subsample where there's no change in a woman's exposure to their husbands. So basically they're couples with different occupations, women in agriculture who are married to husbands who are working in non-agricultural manual jobs like truck driver, construction worker, and so on. Basically, a mill opening is a shock to the woman's earnings, not to the couple's shared time in this for the subsample, since for those occupation pairs, they were already not seeing each other during the day before a mill opening. And after the mill opening, women continue to work outside of the home, but now in like a different occupation. But even for this subset of couples where there is no change in there's no change in exposure between them, there is still a decline in domestic violence, which is very similar to the main sample, which suggests the fact that the exposure reduction is not the dominant mechanism behind the results. And I also show that for that specific subsample, there is no change in husband's earnings, but there is an increase in women's earnings. There's continued to be the increase in husband's earnings, which suggests the fact that the increase in husband's earnings is not the dominant mechanism behind the result. I cannot still rule out the fact that whether the woman's bargaining power or the increase in household earnings due to women's earnings is like driving the main results or not. But at this stage, what I'm left out with are two main channels, the increase in women's bargaining power, as well as the increase in household earnings due to women's earnings, not to the husband's contribution to the household income, which suggests the fact that the decline in domestic violence is plausibly driven by women's paid employment, where the increase in outside option and women's contribution to household earnings are the two, basically the mechanisms behind this conclusion. We can get to that in the question section. I did like a ton of robustness checks. Again, we can go over during the Q&A. And to conclude, this paper provides causal evidence that the rapid expansion of coffee mills in Rwanda in the 2000s first increased women's paid employment, increased women's and their husbands' earnings, and it decreases domestic violence. And the main conclusion that I highlight is that women's paid employment is plausibly driving the decline in domestic violence. And the policy takeaway from my paper is that improving the labor market opportunities for women has the potential to alleviate domestic violence in a developing country context. Thank you. I hope the last bit of is not that much rushed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, it was perfect time management, and I am happy to open for questions if there are questions from the room here or from the online audience. Yes, we have one question here.
I am wondering if this effect is due to just women's increase in paid employment, or both women's and their husbands. So if it was just women who had the increase in employment, wouldn't there be this instrumental violence that was talked about earlier? So what do you think about that?
So 2 points on this. First, I think there are 2 points to the question. The first one is related to the husband's income, as the second one is basically the instrumental approach. So the first one is that I also make the analysis, the subsample that I go over, which is the husbands who are basically the couple pairs. The couples where basically women are working in agriculture who are married to men with non-agricultural manual jobs. Basically, those husbands are not experiencing an increase in their earnings. So in that setup, but there is no change in the husbands. I think that I skipped that in like pretty fast, so my bad on this. For this subsample, even for the subsample where there is no change in husband's earnings, I still observe a decline in domestic violence. So this is basically the same subsample. Women who are farmers, who are married to non-agricultural, who are married to men with non-agricultural manual jobs. So if we have a subsample, and in that subsample there is an increase in women's earnings, but there is no change in husband's earnings, no increase, no change at all in husband's earnings, I'm still observing a decline in domestic violence, which is very similar to basically very similar to the overall effect that I observe. So this suggests the fact that the increase in husband's earnings is not the main mechanism, main driver of the results. So for going back to the instrumental, so actually in the paper, I have a model which incorporate both different types of domestic violence, instrumental, as well as basically expressive motive, which I summarize as the effect of income on domestic violence. But I have the instrumental approach where I have a prediction on, I allow for the fact that there are different types of domestic violence, and I try to understand what happens, let's say if there's both instrumental approach or like different approaches basically in the interaction between the husband and the wife. And I basically write a prediction of like if women are working for pay, basically how this is affecting the domestic violence in the household. According to a prediction, it suggests the fact that if the woman's earnings are high enough, which means that if the woman's outside option and the bargaining power is high enough, at the end of the day, the effect of women having earnings dominates. And basically, I do not have, I'm not observing the fact that the instrumental or the extractive motive of the husband is not deriving an increase in domestic violence originally. But what I also find in the model is that if the woman's earnings is not that high enough, and the woman does not have that much of like a outside option, I also observe the fact that the extractive motive of the husband is motivating, and there will be an increase in domestic violence. But like you can also check the model for detail, but like I allow for different type of motives, specifically instrumental, in the paper in the model, and that basically the theory predicts that if the women's are if the earning of the woman are like high enough, if the woman's outside option is high enough, and specifically due to the fact that it's high enough, it's also affecting an increase, it's also creating an increase in the household earnings, which is creating an income effect. Now they're enjoying more resources. In those cases, I will be seeing a decline in domestic violence, but I also need to highlight the fact that I'm not ruling out that such a motive is, I'm allowing for that motive to happen, but according to my results, the effect of the job is, I see, is basically creating a decline, although I'm not saying that, I'm not ruling out that motive.
Thank you so much, Deniz.